Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
Hi, I found your podcast very interesting and have a specific question. I'm an authenticity user and I was previously in a relationship with an accuracy user. We often found ourselves engaged in conflict due to using our decision-making functions in an unhealthy way, as you outline in your podcast. I can't help thinking that our different decision-making processes were poorly aligned in that accuracy seeks the truth and, when healthy, will be open to other arguments if faced with a sound counter-argument based on facts. Authenticity, on the other hand, has little to do with facts in the traditional sense and is based on what feels right. In the INFP podcast, you mentioned that authenticity was difficult for users of other processes to get a handle on for precisely this reason, which is why INFPs often feel invalidated and accused of being illogical. I feel that this mismatch made it all too easy for both of us to slide into undeveloped mode and argue neither effectively nor respectfully. My question is this: as authenticity users do not base arguments on facts, can an authenticity user ever really present an argument in a way that will be convincing to an accuracy user? Or is it necessary for the authenticity user to change their style of argument to speak accuracy language? Can you say something about your personal experiences of this as an accuracy and authenticity user?
So what's interesting about this question is that it wasn't actually a PHQ question. It was a question that somebody left in the comment section on one of our blog posts. And it's spawned such an interesting dialogue between you and I, Joel, that we thought we would turn it into a PHQ so that everybody could benefit. But we don't have anything like definitive to state about this. It was more that the conversation that came up between us, we thought was intriguing enough that we would, we kind of spitball it here on a PHQ as well.
Yeah. So thank you, by the way, for the question. And the first thing is, I know embedded in the question is this assumption that authenticity doesn't have logical arguments. And I want to just be very clear that I hope that that's not the impression that we've given in the description of authenticity. I believe that, authenticity is a process used by feelers. So, feeling decision-making obviously takes into account, with authenticity as a decision-making function, it takes into account the feelings of other people, and it also really takes into account mostly how you individually are emotionally impacted by decisions. You as a person, internally, how does this make you feel? What's the right thing to do? How does it feel inside, the internal alignment part? And we've always say that, all thinkers can feel and all feelers can think. It's not that authenticity doesn't use any logic at all. It's just that oftentimes when an authenticity person is making a decision, they're going to take into account that internal feeling experience for those decisions. That's really important, how that impacts you as an authenticity user. So to distill the question down to its basic essence, it's this: how can I as an authenticity user communicate with people of different types, particularly people that are accuracy, because they're looking for specific pieces of information and data to be able to make their decisions. And I don't always have specific pieces of information and data. Sometimes it's an impression or a feeling I have or something that bubbles up in me. And I just feel so strongly about this thing or this position or this topic. And sometimes I can't articulate that in a clear, concise, accurate way. And so and I think the question is basically, so when I communicate this to an accuracy person, sometimes I feel like they're dismissive or we devolve into a bad fight or disagreement because I can't articulate that specific piece of information they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think the reason why this was so intriguing to us is that you are an authenticity user and I'm an accuracy user. Yeah. You're an ENFP, I'm an ENCP.
Oh, and I feel your pain trying to communicate with Antonia. I totally feel no, I'm kidding. No, I do, but we do have this come up, right? Like This is something that we struggle with sometimes in our communication.
It's definitely something that we've talked about many times. And I think one thing to remember about the cognitive process of introverted thinking, or what we call accuracy, I think what's important to remember about that is it's just as subjective as authenticity is. They're both introverted decision-making processes. The technical name for authenticity is introverted feeling, and the technical name for accuracy is introverted thinking. So it seems as if the thinking function is going to be given more weight to analysis and to, to having more empirical information or data. And while thinking is a lot more focused on getting as clean a data as possible, in particular introverted thinking, it's all about like clean slicing information and getting the data points and looking for, like things that are truth with a capital T and facts and that sort of thing. That's definitely very intriguing to the process. When something makes sense to introverted thinking or accuracy, when something makes sense, that is a subjective experience. All right. It doesn't have to be something that necessarily plays out in the real world. When accuracy thinks something is like, yep, that's absolutely truth, that's how it works, it doesn't have to have any physical manifestation in the outside world. Accuracy sometimes has just as difficult a time as authenticity in proving its data points because it doesn't necessarily have something it can point to. So accuracy and authenticity both have sort of this simpatico problem of trying to convince other people of something that they're experiencing inside of themselves. So I don't want it to sound like accuracy is always going to have the empirical data and information and knowledge, and authenticity is going to be sort of this, fly by the seat of your pants feeling, and that you're trying to convince this person who's all about empirical data, that this feeling is true. Accuracy runs into the same problem when it's trying to convince, say, an effectiveness person, somebody using extroverted thinking, who wants you to point to something in the material realm that proves out the argument. And accuracy goes, well, it might not have anything yet, right? It's theoretical. It might not have anything that it can specifically point to that goes, this absolutely empirically works in the outside world. And sometimes it doesn't need to, because sometimes theory doesn't play out in any definitive way. I mean, isn't that the point of like quantum mechanics and theoretical math? It's like, you don't always have to have something you point to, but that doesn't make it wrong. So accuracy can feel the pain of authenticity in that way. And that's an important thing to remember when you're trying to explain to an accuracy user what's going on for you, because they can actually sympathize with that situation.
However, I will say that accuracy, someone who uses accuracy has an ability to clean slice data and information probably better than almost every other type. Like if you have accuracy as your mental process of making decisions, you're able to oftentimes get down to the actual thing that you're talking about. You understand that, in the middle of an argument or disagreement, and somebody says, well, what about this thing? And the accuracy person can often say, well, that's actually not relevant to the conversation because it sits over here in this category. What we're talking about is this thing right here. And they're very good at keeping things separate, keeping things clean sliced, categorically. And oftentimes we authenticity users don't think in those terms. So we have a tendency, instead of clean slicing things, I've noticed as an authenticity user and other authenticity users I know, we tend to glob things more together, where it's more grafted together. It's globby. Now, we're good at clean slicing emotions and understanding the nuances of emotion, especially our internal emotions. Man, I mean, that is something that I'm world class at. I understand the exact type of sadness I'm feeling if I'm feeling sad. Like, it's because there's like billions of types of sadness, right? And I can really get down to the nitty gritty of that. And oftentimes in a conversation with you, Antonia, if we're talking about emotions, I can help you. You're like, well, I'm feeling this emotion, this emotion. I'm like, well, those are actually two separate. This is this emotion over here, and this one's this one over here.
You're being really generous with me. When I'm feeling an emotion, it's like Hulk mad. And you're like, okay, so let's talk about Hulk mad. And I don't even know what's going on for me. I'm just like, I'm feeling something overwhelming and it's just happening to me and I don't know what's going on. And you're like, that's an emotion. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure it out. So you're being very generous when you say that you help me clean slice. You help me acknowledge emotion to begin with, which is one of the things that is so attractive about authenticity.
Yeah. And so you can see that there's a lot of crossover. There's a subjective nature, like Antonia talked about, for both accuracy and authenticity. And then this ability to categorize different things. Authenticity, again, is categorizing internal emotions, and accuracy is categorizing and clean slicing internal thought. So you can see where the breakdown of communication comes. It depends on what sandbox you're playing in. If you're having a very intense emotional discussion with an accuracy person, you as an authenticity user are going to be at the advantage in that conversation because you understand your own internal emotions. And because of that, you're so good at understanding your own internal emotions, oftentimes you can understand someone else's emotions and what they're bringing to the table. And the alternate is also true. If you're talking about data points, you're talking about logistical things or pieces of information that you're trying to clean slice. The accuracy person in that sandbox is going to have the advantage in the conversation because that's how their mind thinks. So really, it's more of a question of what is the conversation around. And it sounds like from your question you wrote in that a lot of the conversations happen to be around data points because every time you tried to articulate something in a data set, it came out kind of like blah, blah. Like I can't actually communicate what I mean here. I'm trying to get the piece of data to you, but it's coming out jumbled. I don't feel clarity around it. I'm having some struggle here in communicating clearly what I mean, and then it would devolve into frustration and possibly conflict.
There's something you got to understand about accuracy people. So this would be, and I think in particular, since a lot of our listeners are intuitives, these would be in particular INTPs and ENTPs, but this would hold true for STPs as well, I believe. And I don't know if every other accuracy user is doing exactly this or exactly how they're going about it. However, that said, I've noticed this about myself, and I think that this is pretty common because I've seen other accuracy people, when I've described this to them, they go, yeah, I totally do that. I unconsciously am constantly scanning for when people's information is good. And I don't mean the person is good. I mean the information that they're stating categorically is good. So I go through this unconscious vetting process all the time where somebody gives me data and I can pretty much tell whether or not they're a reliable person about this kind of information. Case in point, I have a very lovely person in my life who is an intuitive feeler. And whenever she talks about people's motivations, I listen. Because I know that she's spot on there. I know that every time she's ever talked about people's motivations, my observation has been that it's panned out. She has an insight into people's motivations that's just amazing to me. So I give her a lot of credibility there. And at the same time, anytime she talks about metrics, right? How long it's going to take to do something, how far away something is, how much something costs, how much time it's going to take, I just totally disregard everything she says. Like, I just go, yeah, you have no idea. Because every time you've ever indicated that, this is only going to take 2 hours, or, yeah, it takes 20 minutes to drive there, or, yeah, we have this amount of money to play with this month, and it's always been off. So that says nothing about her as an individual. It doesn't tell me anything about her character or how awesome she is. All it says is that when it comes to metrics, she just doesn't have a handle on that kind of information. So as an accuracy person, I do this all the time with everybody. What information can I trust and what I can't? And I get really zoomed in here. Like, I get real granular. Joel and I were having a conversation not that long ago about how he is the kind of person that I just hand over most of our scheduling around. When it comes to scheduling of content and how we're going to go about it and our media and our social media schedule, I just hand that over to him. But there's one little piece that, and if you don't mind me saying this.
Oh yeah, please. No, it's fine.
You have a tendency to idealize how much we can do in any amount of time. So sometimes you'll schedule something big in the middle of it, right? Like, let's say we have a deadline. Let's say that we have a project that has a deadline, and you'll schedule something that isn't around the project in there thinking, oh, we can handle that too. And a couple times it's been overwhelming because now we're trying to juggle this, this project, we're trying to juggle the deadline and try to get there. And then now we have this other thing we have to handle. So in general, right. And we even had a conversation. You're like, you think I can't schedule? You think I'm incompetent there? I'm like, no, actually, I'm still going to hand all that over to you because I'd much rather you do it. You're way better at this than I am. I'm just going to now constantly be scanning for you adding extra stuff before the deadline, right? Like, if I hear you go, hey, is it okay if we schedule this and this and this? Normally, I just shut my brain off. I go, yeah, totally. Because I'm just assuming you have it handled. But now when you say, hey, can we do this thing? I'm going to now pay attention and go, is that a schedule before the deadline or after? Because I know that you have a little bit of idealism around that, which is not an indictment as to who you are. If you notice, my brain shuts off when we talk about scheduling almost full stop anyway, because I'm total crap at it. So I just hand that power over to you completely, except for now one thing I'm going to be vetting for. I just unconsciously do this all the time. So when you're talking to, the point of all of that is when you're talking to an accuracy person, they are most likely doing this as well. And they may, over time, either have determined that you can't be trusted when it comes to this information, or you can be trusted when it comes to this kind of information. And that's something that happens through the course of time, right? It's like a general faith in the person, based on the accuracy person's vetting process. Do I have a general faith in this person around this topic, or do I not? So one of the ways that an authenticity person can, quote unquote, convince an accuracy person of a piece of information is, first of all, has the accuracy person shut their mind off to you being able to present this kind of content to them? And I mean, get real categorical about that. Are you talking about math? Are you talking about a form of math? Are you talking about specifically geometry, right? And if they've decided that you are never a person, or like you're not the person that they're going to go to about geometry, but you start talking about geometry, they're probably just going to turn their mind off, right? Because you're not the person to go to for geometry. If you're talking about somebody's feelings and what they're going through and having sympathy for it, and the accuracy person's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you know what you're talking about there, then the accuracy person is actually going to look to you as the source of information on this topic. They might actually come to you when it comes to this kind of information. So it's not just an in-the-moment argument. You have to understand that it's like, you have to zoom out and understand that this is an ongoing holistic argument for the accuracy user. This is an ongoing dialogue about whether or not you've proven yourself competent in this specific data set or not. That could be very frustrating if the accuracy user has determined that you're not good with, say, specifically geometry. But then you have to ask yourself, am I the source of information around geometry? Right? Am I that person? So an authenticity user could feel really strongly about this geometric equation, but if they're not a person who is the expert on geometry, or even a normal source of geometry information, then maybe geometry isn't the thing you should be talking about with them, right? Because you have to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm not too great on that. So I'm using geometry as just sort of like just like a really easy, non-offensive example, because there's a lot of different categories of data that an accuracy person will have in their head. And unless you're like a math professor or something, nobody's going to care whether or not they're the go-to person for your geometry. But that said, what kinds of topics are you talking to the accuracy user about? Does it seem to be that they shut off their minds to you when it comes to a specific topic every time? It means they have vetted you as not a good source of data in that specific topic. And then that now needs to be the conversation, not the specific, I think this, well, I think this, well, I think this. The conversation needs to be, do you think that I'm not the kind of person who should be able to have a perspective on the topic of, and then fill in the blank? Like, do you think I'm not a good source of information there? And then ask them for their radically honest comment, because if you don't have that dialogue, and if you're not honest there, then you won't, that's the foundation of it all. You won't be able to build anything on top of that. So I think that's one thing to really remember about accuracy people, is that they might be shutting you off not because of the topic in the moment, but because of an overarching category that they've determined that you either are or are not a good source of information.
The other thing about accuracy, and again, I don't know the details of your personal relationship, but oftentimes, especially if an accuracy person is at all developed, they've done some maturity work, or they've done some personal growth, or they're wanting to be a better version of themselves, they really show up to the world as problem solvers. And that's, oftentimes when you're in the middle of a conversation, you might deposit emotion into the air. You might say, here's my emotion, here's what I'm thinking, or here's the thoughts I have. And they might start to work on trying to solve a problem and get down to the specifics. They might latch onto one specific thing you say, and you actually didn't intend to get specific about something. You were using that as an example to get the broader context of what you're talking about. And I've noticed this happen actually with you and I, Antonia. It's, we'll be in a conversation, we'll be discussing something, and I have an impression of something, and I don't have that accuracy piece to be able to clean slice it down to the nugget of the actual thing I'm trying to talk about. So I'll just start throwing a bunch of things out. And what I'm actually trying to do there is I'm subconsciously trying to enlist your help to get to the question. It's kind of like doing a couple Google searches to try to figure out how to ask the question, to really ask the question to get the actual results you want. So initially, when I'm showing up the conversation, I'm sometimes trying to figure out what I'm actually trying to communicate. I'm trying to get to that piece of data so we can actually have a conversation around it. And I'm stabbing it at the wind. I'm throwing some things out. I might throw out a really clear, specific example that's an example of the broader thing I'm trying to talk about, and you'll latch onto it. You'll say, oh, well, this reason, this is wrong, and that's good, and this is bad. And I'm like, wait, well, that wasn't what I was trying to say. I was actually trying to say something bigger than that, but I don't have the words for it yet. And what I've learned is to enlist your help in getting to that question. Because if you're really in your accuracy process, you're going to not have emotions clouding your thoughts. It's not going to be like you're worried that I'm trying to trick you or manipulate you something. You're actually interested in the data. And if I can say to you, can you help me get to the question I'm asking? I've got an impression of it and I don't exactly know what I'm trying to talk about here. I think if you can help me talk it out, maybe we can get to a place where I can actually get to the heart of what I'm saying. And I think that that's another strategy I've used with in our conversation. Even when we have some conflict arise, I'll often say, I just can't articulate this. I feel out of my depth right now. You're a lot more equipped in the moment, clean slicing information. Can you help me articulate what I'm trying to say? And you actually will help me. Just like I'll help you with emotions when you're feeling something, you often help me clarify my communication and my data points in conversation. And being around you, I've gotten better and better and better at it because I've watched and observed how your mind's working. It's obviously not my strength. It's not my skill set, but I'm improving. And I think our conversations are better now because I've enlisted your help. So that's another idea in a relationship. If you're an authenticity person, particularly with an accuracy person, you say to them, hey, you're a natural problem solver. Help me communicate better so we can resolve this conflict right now or this conversation right now. That would be really helpful for me.
Yeah. I think you're better at clean slicing information than I am at emotions. And that's actually another piece of it is that, at least in our relationship, you have proven yourself so many times to be a person who is very competent in general. I've seen you make predictions about, you'll make a prediction about like where social media is headed or just standard media in business. You're like, oh, well, in 5 years, we're going to be doing this thing. And sure enough, within like 2 or 3 years, it's happening. And I'm like, wow, he really has his finger on the pulse of this. So again, it's like a longer conversation with me. I have learned to respect your gifts so much that even when we're in my sandbox or playing on my turf, I don't feel any need to disregard you because I know that you have hidden wisdom that I don't possess. And so since I respect that, I'm not going to just sort of go, well, no, you're obviously totally wrong here because blah, 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 blah. I recognize that you might have something that I haven't seen yet, and I'm open to that. Now, if we get in a conversation where I'm feeling more and more confident that I'm seeing things in a more clean sliced way than you are, and that the data set probably favors my perspective over yours, then I have no problem going, I don't know if you're seeing this clearly. I don't have any problem saying that. Just like if I were to be navigating that feeler space and you'd be like, yeah, no, that's not what's going on for you at all. I think we admire and respect each other's positions of strength, and we try to, call upon them in conversation and in our relationship. And we'll recognize when we're in the other person's sandbox and that this is just their area of strength. But again, for an accuracy person, it's an ongoing conversation. And so probably it's the same thing for an authenticity person. It's an ongoing conversation of intent and positive intent and making sure that the other person has good motive. There's an ongoing feel of like, I can trust this person or I can't when it comes to their intent. That's an ongoing dialogue. And for accuracy, it's a lot more impersonal. It's about vetting the data, but it's that ongoing conversation.
So as an authenticity person, just to kind of summarize it, you can say something else, Antonia, if you want, but for you, if you are an authenticity person listening and you are, you're in a relationship with an accuracy person or any other type, it really doesn't even matter about accuracy. You really are, what I believe we are trying to communicate as authenticity people is, please, I'm not always going to get the data set right. I'm going to have some like impressions sometimes because I don't have the clean slicing ability. But please understand that I'm showing up with good motivation. Please validate my motivation. Even if I can't completely articulate to you in a relationship the exact thing that makes sense to you as an accuracy person, can you at least appreciate and trust that my motivation is solid here and I have good intent for the relationship. I have good intent for you. And sometimes I just feel strongly about things. And please don't think that those strong feelings are intended. My motivation is not to hurt you or make you feel bad or wrong. My motivation is to honestly improve the quality of our relationship. And you have to actually show up this way as an authenticity person. You actually have to have good motivation. But I think I've actually said this to you at some points. We've been in a conversation or a disagreement and I'm like, Antonia, I don't have the clean slice data. I just don't have it. Can you please just honor and validate that I have good motivation here and I want the best for us. and I just feel strongly about this thing. And even if we agree to disagree, this is my position. I may not be able to tell you why it is, but it feels so strongly for me.
Yeah. As an accuracy person, I respect radical honesty more than I do clean slice data. So if a person comes to me or in the conversation has a radically honest moment where they say something like that, it diffuses all tension, need to be right. Like all of that just kind of goes, yeah, no, totally. I can completely respect that. I think for me, and my guess is that this is not uncommon for thinker perceivers. So, as I mentioned, all the thinker perceivers use accuracy. I think what it really is it's this idea that people are being dishonest with themselves and with others when it comes to their information. And because they deal with things like biases and cognitive dissonance all the time. And not to say that accuracy people don't also, right? We do all the time as well. It's just that's really on our radar. And so we're always trying to scan for it. Because so many people do that and then insist that they're right, insist that their position is just as valid as everybody else's position. To accuracy, that's maddening because it's like, well, that's the cause of all the heartache in the world, as far as I'm concerned. All of this cognitive dissonance, all this like showing up and just assuming everybody's information is equal and just assuming that, like my ignorance is just as worthy as your expertise, right? Like this is maddening to an accuracy person. But if they're in a conversation with somebody and the other person has a radically honest moment where they go, look, I don't know if I have all the information in my head. I don't know if I have all the data points, just perfectly lined up in my brain. I just have this impression. And if I feel really strongly about it, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but I know that this is meaningful to me. So I want it to be a part of the dialogue. To me, like just the moment of radical honesty takes away all that frustration of, the whole like my expertise is, or your expertise is just as meaningful as my ignorance. It removes all of that frustration because it's like, oh yeah, well I can make space for that. Like I get that. Sometimes I just have an impression of something and I don't know why I think I'm right, but I'm pretty sure I am. I get that. So it's really about that piece of that radical honesty. And I think one thing I do want to mention as well is that when accuracy is not developed, because we're making a lot of assumptions that the authenticity user and the accuracy user are both like developed people or they're doing their best to, to be their higher selves. When accuracy is not developed, just like authenticity, it doubles down on its own rightness. It wants to be right so bad. And my suspicion is that this is based on the fact that they're both introverted decision-making processes. Anytime something is introverted, it means it's a subjective experience. And accuracy, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, accuracy deals with the same issue of having subjective experience of something making sense to it as an individual and struggling to try to explain it to other people because other people want tangible, concrete evidence for it. And sometimes you just don't have it yet. Like you're pretty sure you're right, but people need more concreteness than you're able to provide for them, and so they won't buy it. I think of that phrase, scientific progress is made one funeral at a time, because when somebody provides an answer for something that is scientific, but maybe not, it doesn't necessarily have firm evidence for it yet, whatever the previous concept about that scientific information is just generally accepted. And until there's concrete evidence for the contrary, all the other scientists are just going to hold to their old position. It happened with Einstein, right? The whole concept of quantum physics and just everything he thought of, which is for the most part pretty accepted today. Like the Einstein definitely, took over Newtonian physics pretty clearly at this point. And also most of the scientists during his time period did not accept it. So there's a frustration there for accuracy, just like for authenticity. There's a feeling of being marginalized. There's a feeling of being invalidated for your data points. And when you experience that, it's very difficult to not just double down on being right and try to force other people to see it. So it takes maturity on accuracy's part to not just go, no, I'm right and everybody else is an idiot, right? And that's why young accuracy users will usually think everybody else on the planet is an idiot, except for them, because they're trying so hard to get other people to see what they're talking about. So it's a very similar thing that's happening for accuracy. And it takes some time, some seasoning, some maturity in order to not run to that double down space, but instead go towards a place where they're opening their frame and going, okay, I could be wrong here. I'm not making the assumption I'm right. I'm not just trying to soothe my ego and, feel like the whole world is against me, right? And just go, well, no, I know I'm right and I'm just going to stand there firmly. It takes a little bit of time to go, the whole world isn't against you. You have a gift that it needs, and you don't have to be right all the time at the same time. So understanding that accuracy is dealing with something similar to authenticity, I think helps the authenticity user realize what's going on for them, because that's something they can sympathize with.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. And if you have a question for PHQ questions from the community here at Personality Hacker, head over to personalityhacker.com. You can ask your question there. There are several different methods to do that. Also, we want you to join us over at facebook.com/personalityhacker. There's a growing community of like minds just like you, asking questions, discussing topics. There's content coming out over there, and there's a growing community of people that I think you'll get along with. So we want to invite you over there. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk to you on the next PHQ questions from the Personality Hacker community.